A lot of people have trouble recognizing their attachment needs, not because on some level they don't know what they are, but because oftentimes, in order for us to recognize our attachment needs, it forces us to have to linger in those raw and vulnerable places long enough to recognize it in the moment. So recognizing our attachment needs and longings, it's not a mystery. We don't have to peel back layers of trauma or dive deep into the psyche to understand what our attachment longings are. But there is a requirement for us to be able to step into those uncomfortable emotions, those past traumas, those fears, and linger in those long enough to be able to recognize that. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how to recognize your attachment needs. Let's get started.
Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast that provides support and guidance to help heal the wounds of attachment trauma. Whether you find yourself struggling with unresolved issues in the past or have experienced trauma in your current relationship, our goal is to provide accurate, scientifically informed information, as well as the tools to help you create a secure connection between you and your partner. And here's your host, Tom Philp.
People will often tell me, I want a partner who will respect me. I want a partner who will spend time with me. I want a partner I can trust and depend on. I want a partner who is kind, funny, strong, independent, a good financial provider, so on and so forth. And all these are wonderful qualities. All of us want to have these types of qualities in our best friend and our partner. But these aren't exactly attachment needs. These are wonderful qualities that are important, but they're not really fundamental at a relational level. And when I'm talking about recognizing our attachment needs, I'm talking about something much deeper in pivotal moments. When things are good, absolutely. We want a partner we can depend on, a partner who's strong, who's independent, who can be there for us. But that's not really the attachment needs that we need in vulnerable moments. And so this list of characteristics are great, and I love it when people tell me this, but that's not really the same thing I'm talking about today. In order to recognize our attachment needs and longings means we have to be able to be in touch with our vulnerability. Now, I mentioned this in the opening of the show. We have to be able to linger in the wound or the pain associated with that need. And since we are designed to avoid or move away from our pain when it arises, this makes being able to tap into that need and understand it all that more challenging. When I help couples get to the vulnerable part of themselves that they often keep hidden, the places where they don't let anyone else see, that wounded part of themselves that says, I'm not worthy of love, I don't deserve to be loved in these places, I'm broken, or I'll never find somebody who will understand me. These are the real attachment needs and longings that I'm talking about here today. These places deep down that we don't often even let ourselves go, let alone let other people see or let other people go there with us. There's something that happens when I'm working with couples and we can get down to these attachment needs that is absolutely profound and can be life-changing. And oftentimes I hear things like, I didn't know that about myself, or I've never really thought about it that way, and I'm learning something completely new. Or I'll hear something from their partner that says, I kind of knew that about my partner, but I've never heard it like that before. Or my partner's never let me into these places before. My partner's never been really that vulnerable with me. I can't believe I'm seeing this. This is amazing. This is wonderful. It feels like I'm really connected to him or her in this moment. So when I'm helping couples be able to drill down and recognize their attachment needs, it means first and foremost, I have to be able to help them be an emotional regulator and somebody that they can trust that will not abandon them in those moments. And this, I think, is part of the hard part of getting down to our attachment needs is being able to, one, not only linger in that moment long enough for us to be able to recognize it, but to also allow other people to see us in that place and not to quickly get defensive or move into our protective strategies. Because when we linger there and when we let other people see us linger in those raw emotional places, that is when true healing can take place, and it can be absolutely life-changing. Now, notice the difference between the first set of needs that I mentioned. I want a partner who's funny, kind, helpful, independent, whatever, right? Notice how the focus is a lot on the person and a list of characteristics. And notice that the second list that I talked about is much more about the view of self. It's much more rooted in the I. I'm never loved in these places. I want somebody who will be able to sit with me and see me in these emotional, vulnerable moments. And so oftentimes our attachment needs and longings, they're completely wrapped up in the view of self. And by that, I don't mean selfish. I just mean they are wrapped up in our view of self. And most often it's about the core self, the things that we're often missing in our relationship with our parents, and the developmental strivings that have often gone wrong. And so this is what we're really needing and longing for in those moments, things that we didn't have, things that when they occurred, we shut those places down, we compartmentalize them, we move them to the darker recesses of who we are, and chained and bolt locked the door because we don't want to go there. One, because it's painful ourselves, but two is because nobody's really going there with us. Nobody's going to see us in those places. And so understanding our attachment needs mean we get in touch with a view of self, and most likely a view of self that we don't often let others see in certain times. It's buried beneath layers of protection and defenses and ways of being in the world that we've learned to help keep us safe. But when we do get in touch with it, this part of ourselves, it's raw and painful, and there's something we desperately need that can only come from somebody else seeing us in these places. I'll often ask a person that I'm working with, either a couple or individual, when they start to let me into those places, when they start to expose them, and I know this is so difficult for them, I'll ask them, who sees you in this place? Whoever gets to see you in this raw, emotional place? And more often than not, the answer is no one. No one gets to see me. One, because they don't let themselves go there that often. But two, because nobody was there for them in the past. And so they don't often trust anybody else being able to sit there in those places with them. It's just too hard. Something that we can provide ourselves, and that when we begin to really understand what our attachment needs are, can only come from somebody else. So these longings that I'm talking about, we cannot provide for ourselves. We can't be a mirror to our own emotions. We can't be two people at once, one experiencing this and the second person being able to show up and sit with them and empathize and have compassion for that place as well. So these needs can really only come from an attachment figure, from someone that we would profoundly trust to be able to help us in those moments. So as I've said, the first step is being able to hold on to our vulnerability long enough to understand this view of self. This is where meditation, fasting, yoga, alone time, quiet time, this is where a lot of the exercises that I talk about for how to stay rooted in our body and is so pivotal to being able to overcome trauma, this is where these types of exercises come in. This is where meditation and a short fast, 12 or 24 hours, or yoga or Tai Chi, any of these types of things. And the reason is because they get us rooted in our body, and they allow us to be able to have more peace in our body and more calm in our body. And as a result, we are more capable of being able to hold on to our vulnerable places for a little bit longer. And so it's really important to start working and trying these types of exercises, because they can be so helpful for this reason alone. It helps us get in touch with our attachment needs in ways that we often block out or push to the recesses of our mind in order to compartmentalize and in order to move on with life, to deal with the day-to-day stuff, to have to go to work, to have to attend to family, to have to raise our children, to have to function in the world. All of that going on has a price that we pay. And the price we pay is we often push and compartmentalize our raw, emotional, traumatic places to a dark corner. So holding on to our vulnerability, I like to think about it a little bit like a candle in a burning room. It doesn't take much to extinguish the flame of a candle. A small wind, somebody's breath, a door opening or closing. It doesn't take much to blow out the flame. And yet when the flame is lit, we can see everything in the room. It illuminates the entire room. Even a small flame can illuminate the entire room. So it doesn't take much for us to move away from our vulnerable places. A harsh word, a disapproving look from our partner, criticism, blame, abandonment, rejection. But when we learn to hold on to our vulnerability a little bit longer, then just like when the flame is illuminated, it helps us to be able to understand our attachment needs. It illuminates the needs beneath the pain, just like the candle illuminates the room. And it doesn't take much to blow it out. It doesn't take much for us to move away from our attachment longings and needs. But to do that, we have to be able to sit long enough within our vulnerability in order for us to be able to recognize them. So as I began this podcast and I was listing these characteristics of people, those are wonderful characteristics to have, but that's not really the attachment longings and needs that I'm talking about here today. And it's often not about grand gestures. Sometimes the attachment needs and longings, they show up in really small ways. They can be often very intimate acts of empathy, compassion, and sacrifice on the part of our partner that gets us to our attachment needs, that meets our attachment needs and longings. They can be a gentle touch that says things will be okay. It can be a word of reassurance. I know this is really hard for us right now. We will get through this. It can be a reassuring hug that says, we're going to be all right. You're going to be all right. They're feeling really seen and understood in those moments. And they also know what matters most, that this person's not going to give up on them, that their emotions, and especially the hurt and painful emotions that we don't let anybody see, it sends a message to the person that, hey, you are not too much for me. Whatever it is you're feeling is not going to send me running out the door. I'm not going to leave. You're not too much for me. And when we often get met in these painful places where our partner can show up, it can take away our pain. It doesn't change the past. It doesn't fix everything. But what it does is it allows us to share the painful burden between two people. And that's always easier to share it than it is to bear the load on our shoulders all by ourselves. So it doesn't fix the past. It doesn't correct or make what went wrong right. But what it does is it spreads that pain out a little bit, and it helps us bear that burden, and it helps us be seen in these places where we are not alone. Attachment trauma, they often say, comes in two ways. It comes not only through the event itself, which can be overwhelming and traumatic, but then the trauma is doubled down on because it means that nobody actually sees us when we get traumatized, and nobody helps us process and understand and sits with us in those raw, vulnerable places. And so trauma often can be a double whammy, especially attachment trauma, relational trauma, because somebody can hurt us, they can traumatize us repeatedly. And then there's also no repair that happens that tells us it's okay, it can be better. And so it's just a perpetual rupture, or one rupture after another that can be so difficult for us to be able to understand what's happening, to make sense of that, to be able to have the benefit of an attachment partner. And that's probably a great way of saying it. When you have relational trauma, you do not have the benefit of a secure attachment relationship that somebody will be able to show up for you in these moments and in these places. And so you are left sort of with parts of yourself that become unknown, with parts of yourself you don't often access, or maybe rarely ever access. And so it really becomes all that much more difficult to recognize our attachment needs. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast today. I love making these things for you guys. So thank you so much for listening. This was a really great one I've been thinking a lot about, and especially when I'm working with my couples. How do I get this information out? How do I help people be able to understand how to recognize their attachment needs and longings more? Because this is so crucial to us being able to heal our traumas and for us to be able to create a secure connection when we need to. So being able to hold our vulnerabilities longer, being able to sit with us so that we can invite other people into those moments that will show up for us and help us bear that burden, is oftentimes how we really recognize our attachment longings. And they don't often come in big, grand gestures. They often come in small gestures like touch, kind words, compassionate eyes, things that help us understand in those moments that we don't have to bear that burden and that trauma alone. Thank you all very much. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.